Then looking to the year ahead in Parliament, we have municipal elections coming up. How much does that sort of change the way that MPs need to conduct themselves in Parliament? Because it's part of that broader political
Well, yeah,
project.
I mean, you know, in an election year, you're going to see an awful lot of grandstanding in Parliament by political parties because they're playing to the electorate rather than dealing with the issues before them in the House. But hopefully we won't see too much of that. There will be a recognition, and I think another important concession perhaps that the President made yesterday was to call on South Africans to put the country first. He himself was guilty of having said last year that he puts the ANC ahead of the interests of the country. And for him to concede yesterday that we now need to put the interests of the country first, and I think that's something that we must all welcome. And hopefully all parties will heed that call, not because it's come from the President, but because it is the right thing to do for South Africa.
Yeah. I suppose one of the ways in which he himself could put the country first would be to get onto paying back some of the money for Nkandla.
Yeah, you know, I mentioned the point earlier about emphasizing respect for the Constitution, and I think in the light of the Constitutional Court hearing in the Nkandla matter and the fact that the President did concede significant legal ground in that case, it would have been incumbent upon him to explain his position and to assure the nation that he does take his oath of office seriously, that he is committed to upholding constitutional principles and values.
Yeah, because in that case of Nkandla, it's always through his lawyers that we hear what is assumed to be his stance on paying back the money and all the upgrades that were made without his concession and so forth, but rarely mentioned in Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, the discussion, he avoided any discussion on it. When it was raised by members of the opposition, it was clamped down on the basis that it was sub judice. And I think this is a matter that is going to be resolved soon. We expect a judgment from the Constitutional Court relatively soon, I would imagine, and then hopefully we'll get on with implementing the judgment.
What's your response to some opposition parties' argument that President Zuma should simply step down? If he's already acknowledged that he was in breach of the Constitution over Nkandla, that's it. It's a done deal.
Well, it's at the end of the day, the removal of the President from office is a quintessentially political decision. It's a decision that lies in the hands of the National Assembly, not of the courts. So the courts may make a finding that the President was in breach of his oath of office or that he violated his constitutional responsibility. That does not automatically lead to the impeachment of the President. There's still a parliamentary process that has to be followed, and Parliament will ultimately decide on that question. Obviously, in seeking to make political capital, members of the opposition will use that concession to try and demonstrate that the President is unfit for office.
Just to come back to SONA, you mentioned that there were some star commissions. What would you say those are?
Let me start by saying many of them were corrected in his response yesterday. So I think people pointed out those omissions in the course of the debate, so issues around education, corruption, and so on. Which were left out. The issue of the drought crisis, for example, was another one that was left out. So the President responded to some of those, perhaps not to everyone's satisfaction, but took on board some of the criticism that was made. But it was also interesting to note that the President veered off from his scripted speech yesterday to deliver a couple of messages. One in response to Bantu Holomisa from the UDM, whose calls for an economic codessa were made during the debate, and the President responded to that in some way, as well as the fact of the President speaking directly to Musi Maimane from the DA and in terms of the behavior of MPs in the House, and commending Maimane for his interventions last Thursday, but then chastising the DA for their behavior thereafter. It would have been great to have seen this kind of response from the President a while ago when the disruptions in Parliament first happened, and for him to have taken the initiative to deal with the issues that really started this kind of engagement in Parliament, of his refusal to answer questions around Nkandla, which is what gave rise to the initial disruptions in Parliament. So the President is not without responsibility in how Parliament has degenerated. Yeah.